now we have learnt about the various causes which were the political and the economic causes that caused the uprising of 1857. In this video, we will be looking at the various socio-religious as well as military causes that triggered the event of 1857, which also became the first war of independence. The first factor was the discrimination against Indians. Now, when the British colonizers came into India and they took India as a colony, at that point of time itself they had the sense that Indians were uncultured and they did not have any sense of civilization. So Indians were more often than not looked down upon racially as well. So the racial discrimination and the factor of discrimination on the base of this race of us and them, that prevailed. Now from that arose the factor when Indians were not given any primary position, any primary responsibility. So it was always the Englishmen who got these positions, importance, pedestals in high offices under the British government. So we see that the British officers misbehaved and were disrespectful towards Indians. For example, you can see in this very board that it is written Royal Simla Club, no dogs or Indians. So they situated these boards outside stating that no dogs or Indians allowed, which would mean that Indians are nothing more than animals. So basically stating that they were very uncultured and uncivilized and barbaric, right? So we see that the important factor here is the British officers are misbehaving and disrespecting the Indians. But when it came to the richer section of the society, the richer section of the Indian society itself, that got away with exploitation of the poor sections and oppressing these poor sections. So basically the aristocrats, the upper class, the moneyed class people would then be supported by these Britishers because they held an amount of wealth that might be required later by the colonizers as well. Thus we understand that the way they had created these revenue systems, these policies that went against the Indians in a way where the most amount of exploitation was done on them, keeping in mind the most amount of revenue generation. We have learnt and we have seen how the British capitalist mindset was fulfilled by making India a colonial economic structure. So we understand that whenever these revenue systems failed, that is whenever the peasants could not pay up the taxes, pay up in the methods that were advised by the Britishers, then we see that the peasants were tortured and beaten up. So the amount of discrimination and torture had reached to a level where it not only angered the people, but they were agitated with the fact that they were being exploited to the maximum without any return of their own. The second factor is, of course, that we have to remember that the Britishers were, after all, foreigners. Now, when foreigners are coming in to a colony, when they are taking a colony and trying to govern it, they will of course have certain motives behind it. Now, another side of the picture came when the religious side was answered. That is, the main motive that they had also included conversion of as many Indians as possible to the religion of Christianity. In order to do so, we see that the British Parliament at that point of time is taking up number of policies that supported the coming of the missionaries. Now, when the missionary activity started increasing, Indian people automatically, they got feared of the fact that, their religions, the Hindus and the Muslims, were scared of the fact that most of the people would be converted to the new religion of Christianity. Now, this was done by the Charter Act of 1813, where the permission was granted to the missionaries to come to India and engage in religious conversion. So they were not only allowed to come and spread the word of imperialism per se, but they were also allowed to preach the religion of Christianity. Thus, keeping in mind that the British had therefore a concept of not only colonizing but also changing the Indians as and how they required them to be changed. So of course you can understand that these Indian people who till now lived with their own religions, now they feel endangered to the maximum state. So here we see that conversion by Christian missionaries was being propagated. As you can see that a Christian missionary who has landed just on shore, and that person is immediately preaching Christianity, having a Bible in the hand. And here we see the British missionary William Carey baptizing an Indian man in Hooghly River in 19th century. So you can understand by these pictures of how important this change became and how the Indians might have scrutinized this very fact that somebody was endangering them from choosing which religion to take up. Now we see it was not just the coming of the missionaries or the fact of conversion, but it was also the factor when Indians started to notice that the Britishers more so pushed the coming of Western education. So the traditional methodologies of, Hindu Sanskritic literature or, education that was imparted in madrasas, that was changing with the coming of Western education, and the British colonizers were pushing this Western thought process, this Western education, more so in the Indian society when English education is being introduced. And this is happening more profoundly or more profusely when Persian, which was the legal language till that point of time, that is being changed to English. So this was the official language at that point of time in India, where all work used to happen, all documented work used to happen in Persian. So that was being changed now to English. So we see that the official language was changed from Persian to English, and this Charter Act of 1813 asserted a fund of rupees 1 lakh to be spent for spreading Western education in India. So you can understand that the motives of the British government was ultimately to spread the Western ideology and the Western culture in the colonies as well, for which it had also situated 1 lakh rupees to be given in order to work towards that change. So automatically we understand that these Indians, these native indigenous people who used to speak in their vernacular, when English is becoming an official language, which is a foreign language, it is becoming much more difficult for them to really understand what is actually going on paper as well. So the legalities of it, Indians were not understanding because English was primarily a foreign language and British colonizers were therefore having an upper hand in it. So we see that attempts were made to change the Hindu law of property and inheritance. Now here the British colonizers were not only interfering in social policies that were required, but also in religious aspects as well. Now, we have already seen that the Indian mass, the Indian subcontinent was a diverse place. So there were many people from many religions living here. Now, when the British colonizers decided to meddle into the matters of religion, that is when people got directly inflicted by that interference. Because now they feared that in order to seek out maximum amount of conversion, they were trying to change the existing religious structure. And the first attack that they received, they felt that it was an attack, was in the Hindu law of inheritance, where, the idea was who should be getting the property from the father. So if somebody, priorly the law stated that if somebody would have converted from Hinduism to some other religion, they would not be getting any sort of property from the father. They would not inherit any property. But there was an act that established the fact that even if you are converting to Christianity, you would receive the property that you were supposed to inherit. Now, this was done by the Religious Disabilities Act, which was passed in 1850, which abolished the laws affecting the rights of people converting to another religion. So you can understand that from an outsider's point of view, it looked like primarily British colonizers were doing this entire thing to grasp the attention of people to change into Christianity. Therefore, they would ultimately have an incentive of, procuring or inheriting the property that they were supposed to, right? So they won't be fearful of conversion. So the act suggested that even a Christian who had converted from Hinduism could now inherit the property of his father. So there were no restrictions in case of inheritance of the property. So the Indians automatically felt endangered, these native religions automatically felt endangered, and that is why they were so riled up against the British colonizers. The British changed the official language from Dash to English. Was it Urdu, Persian, Hindi or Bengali? The correct answer is Persian. Thus we see that it was not just the socio-religious factors that were making the colonized, the Indians angry, and it was not just these few factors that caused an event like 1857, the uprising of it. So we come to the factor of the economic derivation here, that the British were looking to take away maximum revenue from the colony. Now, when they are looking to derive the maximum revenue from a colony, they will automatically devise certain economic laws, certain economic policies, which we have discussed earlier as well. Now, here we see in case of religious policies, they are including economic structures in it. So, first is that the British decided to impose tax on lands that were owned by temples and mosques. Till the point of time that the British had come in and started governing, none of the rulers had taxed lands that belonged to religious purposes. Now we understand that people automatically felt threatened because, the livelihood that depended on these sort of temples and mosques and religious structures was therefore in danger. That is number one. Number two is the fact that these temples and mosques and places of worship held a very sentimental importance for the people. It was religion, after all, that we are talking about. So this was seen as a serious blow to extract revenue from anywhere possible that the British colonizers were aiming at. So if you see the picture on the screen, this is of Golden Temple. So this is a 19th century picture of Golden Temple, and shrines like these, places of worship like these were now to be taxed under the British government. So this angered the people because they felt that it was a direct blow to their religion. Now, when we are talking about, how religion was being seen by the British colonizers, it is important here to talk about the fact that the British colonizers were the ones who did bring certain changes in certain religious practices, in fact evil practices that were prevalent in the society at that point of time. Now, practices like that of sati, child marriage, female infanticide, all of these, ideas like these and evil practices of such nature were abolished by the colonizers, by the British colonizers, when they formed certain acts against these to protect the people. Now, the British were also behind establishing the Widow Remarriage Act that stated that a widow could get remarried, and all of these practices were related to the Hindu religion at that point of time. Now, automatically, when a colonizer, when a ruler from outside is meddling into the religious matters, that became a direct blow to the orthodox mindset of the Hindu religious people. And they saw it as meddling into their private affair. That was not something which fell under the domain of the British colonizers. So we see that the British attempted to bring about social reforms in India, which was seen as an interference in their religious matters by the common people. Now we see that the Indians are growing suspicious about every act that is being done by the colonizers, and it is not baseless suspicion per se, because the colonizers have been intervening into the private matters of the Indian people, the masses, and things that they are not aware with as well. So the colonizers were of course foreigners. It is a foreign rule that is coming in to govern India, and the foreigners expected to understand everything, to understand how India works per se. So a very striking change was that when the first train was established in Bombay, which was to run from Bombay to Thane on April 1853, Indians viewed this as a conspiracy against them that was hatched by the British colonizers, because they felt that this entire thing was done in order to discriminate amongst them, create a discrimination amongst them, where the discrimination would be between the upper and the lower classes, because at that point of time we know the fact that the train coaches would have different coaches for lower class people and different coaches for upper class people. In fact, they had different coaches for the white skinned people and the brown skinned people. So you see, the entire idea of the anger was not really baseless that Indians had towards the colonizers. Now again, when first telegram was sent in India in 1854, which would go from Mumbai to Pune, this was seen as trying to hatch a conspiracy somehow or the other against the Indians, because they thought that the colonizers were trying to keep an eye out for them. So basically scrutinizing them and constantly keeping them under the radar. Now all these activities, if looked at together, if dotted points are joined through a line on a map, then it seemed to the Indians that these people, these foreigners, are coming into their own subcontinent and ruling over them by these policies that were not supposed to be used on them. Religious policies, economic policies, political policies that only were against the Indian mindset and pro the British capitalist mindset. So if we try and quickly recapitulate the socio-religious causes, we see first is the injustice that was being meted out towards the Indians. Second, the fear of conversion. Third was the westernization of the country, the coming of English language. Next, we have introduction of English as the official language. Persian is being removed, English is becoming the main language now. Taxation of religious places like the temples and the mosques. social reforms brought about by the British, which was seen as the British colonizers meddling into the religious lives of the Indian masses. Next, we see introduction of railways and telegraphs, which created a suspicion among the Indians that the British colonizers were constantly trying to scrutinize them and keep them under a radar. Now, it was not just socio-religious, economic and political causes that created the uprising of 1857. There, of course, has to be the military causes that became quite important and very crucial to build exactly how and when the whistle was blown. So, here is a picture of the Indian Sepoys in the company army. So, these were the people who were under the British army and they were Indian soldiers. Now, because the entire aspect of the British was entirely economic revenue driven, and they were here to derive revenue out of everything that they do. They also had to keep in mind that these people who they were appointing in the army under the British army, who were the Indian soldiers, were also to be kept in check. Because as we have discussed before, the entire civilizing concept of the British colonizers did not leave them, because they thought that the Indians are, as we saw, uncivilized and uncultured and almost very similar to dogs and animals. Now, how do they keep that in check? They placed certain military revisions, certain policies that was really diminishing, number one, and number two, it constantly sort of put the Indian soldiers at a lower pedestal. The first factor that we see here is that no Indian soldier was given the highest of ranks. So all the high official ranks in the army were reserved for only Englishmen. The highest rank that an Indian soldier could go up to was that of a subedar. So there was an open discrimination between the Englishmen and the Indian soldiers on the basis of their, of course, their race and their skin color, because even if the Indian soldier fought very well, had a great record, he was not to be given the position of the highest official, and it was only the Englishmen who were to hold the most important positions in the army. The second factor that we come to know about is that it was these military policies that were brought by the British East India Company and the British colonizers, through which they were constantly clashing with the Indian mindset, with the Indian soldiers' mindset as well. Now, several policies like that of the Service Enlistment Act made the army, made the Indian soldiers feel endangered, because it constantly clashed with their religious ideologies. How so? Let's take a look at an animation. So when the Enlistment Act was situated, it was stated that the Indian soldiers would have to perform overseas activities in the army if and when required. So the General Service Enlistment Act of 1856 stated that this overseas activity was also to be considered as an act in the Indian army, that the Indian army was to deliver when and as and when asked. So what exactly happened is, in Hindu religion, it was stated that if they cross overseas in order to provide service as well, that would be stated as Kala Pani. Kala Pani would mean black water, which would ultimately state that their religion would be lost. So there would be a degrading in the Hindu religion that would happen. So this entirely sort of angered the Indian soldiers who were placed under the British army, and they were agitated by acts like these. The next policy that we see was when Awadh was taken by the doctrine of lapse, when Awadh was under Wajid Ali Shah, and the Britishers used force and they took over Awadh by not stating concrete answers to why they were taking Awadh from Wajid Ali Shah. The military personnel were in anger. Why? The Indian military personnel, who made up almost 90% of the Indian Sepoys in the British Army, were mostly from Awadh. Awadh was their homeland. So when Awadh was annexed in 1856, we see that the soldiers are angered who were in the Bengal regiment, and Awadh was their homeland. So you can very well understand, when Awadh was taken away and Wajid Ali Shah was deported to Calcutta, to Bengal, they were instantly outraged with the fact as to how could a colonizer take this amount of decision. How could the colonizer have such a power to deport the then Nawab of Awadh? But there were again certain changes that were happening politically as well, that sort of gave the military personnel, the soldiers, the Indian soldiers in the British Army, a push to go ahead with their motives. What was that? When Britishers were defeated in the Crimean War, in the Afghan War, that is in the Anglo-Afghan War as well, these Indian soldiers who were agitated towards the British colonizers for all of their policies, for all of their changes that they were bringing, they understood that the British was not invincible. So this was the first time when they felt that the British could also be defeated if fought unitedly. So we see that this picture depicts the British army retreating from Kabul in 1842 after being defeated in the first Anglo-Afghan War. So they realized that British was not invincible, and that myth was entirely broken, that nobody can take over the British colonizers.
नई एनफील्ड राइफल दुनिया की सबसे अच्छी राइफल है एनफील्ड और तुम्हारी पुरानी ब्राउन बेस मस्केट में ज्यादा फर्क नहीं बल्कि यह हल्की है और हजार गज तक निशाना लगाती है पुरानी बंदूक से 5 गुना ज्यादा और यह है कारतूस इसमें बारूद भी है और गोली भी पहले कारतूस को दांत से काटो फिर बारूद अंदर डालो फिर ये गोली ठूसो और इसके बाद जोर से ठोको और फायर करो.
Now, in every event that has occurred in history, there always has to be a trigger point that sort of gave the final blow to that event. Coming of the Enfield rifles in the British Army at that point of time was the final blow that triggered the event of 1857, which is called the Revolt of 1857. Now, what exactly happened? Was it the coming of a new rifle? Was it the coming of a new weaponry? It was actually the rumor of this weaponry, regarding this weaponry, that blew the whistle. Now, as you saw, the introduction of Enfield rifle was done by the British Army to modernize the way weapons were being used, and this modernization was being done from the the base brown sort of machinery muskets that they had, and they were changing to Enfield rifles, where, as you saw in the video, you had to bite the tip of it and then fill the Enfield rifle and then use it to fire. Now, there was a rumor regarding the entire thing that this cartridge that they had to bite off in order to fill the rifle was greased with pig and cow fat. Now this became a major rumor. Why? Because the Hindus and the Muslims were not allowed to consume cows and pigs respectively. So it was a blow again to their religious mindset, through which these people in the Indian army were agitated because the colonizers had not taken their ideas into consideration. So we see that the rumor spread like wildfire that the paper cartridges of Enfield rifles were greased with cow and pig fat. Now this became the final pin on the coffin when the Sepoys rose in mutiny in 1857 against the domination of their colonizers. So if we try and look at the military causes quickly, first was of course the discrimination in the army against the Indian Sepoys, where they weren't allowed to rise in, in classes. Second is the General Service Enlistment Act that compelled the Indian army to move overseas for service if required. That was also a kind of religious blow to the army. Third is the interference in religious matters, which was also seen by the General Service Enlistment Act. Next was the annexation of Awadh, when the Indian Sepoys were absolutely angered by the annexation of Awadh and also how Wajid Ali Shah was deported to Bengal. Next, we see that the myth of the British invincibility being broken after the Anglo-Afghan War and the British defeat in it. And finally, the rumor around the newly launched Enfield rifles was the reason behind, we could say, the uprising of 1857. Thus we see that all these socio-religious as well as military factors were, instrumental behind the push, the impetus that was given to the people, to the common masses, to the aristocrats, the king, as well as the sepoys and the military personnel to go ahead and voice their opinion against their British colonizer, which would ultimately come to be known as the First War of Independence. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon. You can also register for free at DeltaStep.com or download the DeltaStep app to get access to all our 5,000 plus amazing videos as per your school syllabus. Master each topic with our adaptive practice technology. Get million plus questions with step-by-step solutions and unlimited mock tests. Get all your doubts resolved instantly, learn via games, and win amazing prizes like PlayStations and iPads. So at DeltaStep, learning is not just fun and easy, it is rewarding too. So register for free now.